Good afternoon. Welcome back to our last talk on the series of God interacting in the world. Next week, Father Sam will be presenting a talk on St. Francis of Assisi, From Riches to Rags. I invite you to recall your consciousness roughly between the ages of 16 and 26. Can you let your memories and choices from this time in your life come alive and find fresh meaning with a little help from Spirit? What was the relationship between your faith in God and the things of the world? Things like getting an education, starting a career, making money. For me, it was an experience of being disintegrated, splintered, fragmented, like I was living in parallel universes, divergent. I came of age in the 1980s with movies like Karate Kid, great movie, and Wall Street, making a splash. Remember the famous line, "Greed is good. Greed is good." This was the cultural context in which my generation was asked to choose a career or livelihood. Not a very strong foundation for something as significant as the work that we do, how we spend a big chunk of our time. And if we have learned anything from the last two talks, it's the importance of a strong foundation. Last week, we came to see that the strength and resilience of the American economy ultimately finds its roots in the designs of creation, the rhythms and laws formed over billions of years of evolution, which includes, hopefully, the intelligence and moral imagination of man and woman. And creation itself, our planet, finds its foundation in the mind and heart of the Eternal One, the ground of all being. That's a pretty solid foundation, right? That's a fabric that cannot be torn apart. Our livelihoods, like the economy, like creation, absolutely need the foundation and fabric of our loving God. For we are creatures, we're dependent. There's nothing wrong with that. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, however, I didn't think that way. I thought that my foundation in life would be found in college degrees, or certain skills, or even the passion of finding success. This was what the world taught me. Perhaps some of you can relate to this. Of course, skills and education are wonderful gifts, and God will work through these. And I'll have a little more to say about this when we think about how to discern God's will in our lives. But right now, I want to take a step back and say a little more about the splinterness or divergence that I experienced in my teens and 20s. It was like I was torn between two worlds. One world I'll call church world. I enjoyed going to Mass every Sunday with my sisters and my parents, going through CCD classes, learning to be an altar boy, later a server. I enjoyed community service at senior living homes, and just trying to be a decent boy. But then there was the other world, what I call Dad's world. Between Monday and Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., I would see my dad get spiffed up in his three-piece suit. I thought it was so cool. He'd go off to work in the business world, in the fledgling computer industry, and my dad bought me shares of stock in his company, 100 shares when I was like 9. And he taught me how to read the financial sections of the newspaper. So I'd come rushing back from grade school, excited to see if the value of my company rose. These were two worlds that seemed on parallel tracks. It was difficult for me to see their convergence, how they fit together. Unconsciously, though, with a little help from God, a lot of help from God, I was making choices in a more unified direction. I chose to major in economics. I loved learning about money while attending a Catholic Jesuit college. Then after college, I wasn't ready to take a dive into the business field, so I entered a year of volunteer service in Kansas City in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. And then a couple years later, after graduate school and 1 year teaching, I entered the Society of Jesus. And it was these 4 years and 4 months, especially the summers I spent in Central America, that became for me a fulcrum, a prism, through which my life changed forever. I began to look for God in all areas of life. In recent years, in thinking about what God has done in my life, a few images come to mind. God has been like a bridge, bringing together my spiritual life and the practical life. But the image I find most interesting is like that of a railroad switchman, Jesus Christ himself, pulling a lever periodic times in my life, smoothly bringing the divergent tracks of my life into a unified whole, in which I could more fruitfully see how God was working in the world and in my life. So after these 4 years, I left the Jesuits, and over the course of the next 23 plus years to today, I would embark on an adventurous journey that would lead to dozens of jobs and many career starts and stops, all types. I'd like to touch on just 3 of these work experiences and the main lesson that I gleaned from each. The first 2 jobs I held for just about a year. The first lesson, it's not about money. In 2003, 2004, I worked for the Pine Street Inn on the overnight outreach van in Boston. And we would go around with sacks of sandwiches and hot chocolate and hot soup. We looked for people who were at least temporarily on the streets. And we go into the alleyways between the restaurants and the Back Bay and around Fenway Park and the Charles River and in bridges, pretty much all of Boston. And we struck up conversations. And I experienced a certain humility and vulnerability in men and women of all ages. People who were in college, who left families behind. They struggled with drug or drink or mental illness. They knew their flaws and their failings. The job paid $11.50 an hour. It paid the bills. But the value was infinitely greater than a paycheck, for I had opportunities every night to encounter Christ. Have you ever had the experience of working at a job that was so much more than the pay or compensation? Knowing the realities of homelessness in our own neighborhoods, I'm grateful for any opportunity that Our Lady of Mount Carmel can help support Churches for Streets of Hope, which provides services to men who are without shelter in Essex and Middle River. Second lesson, be prepared for challenge, for pushback, when you try to witness to the values of Christ and the kingdom in the world. Values that are opposed to Christ, like wealth and power. Before my work on the streets of Boston, I served as an investment advisor for a company called Progressive Asset Management, which specialized in values-related investing. Given my interest in the church, my boss was all too excited to encourage me to explore faith-based markets. So I eventually would send out detailed letters about what faith-based or Christ-centered investing looks like to over 100 pastors and deacons in what we called high net worth zip codes, very wealthy areas. With pastors, I was looking to give talks in church basements, but with the deacons, I was looking for business. I want to follow through with the letters. I had many conversations. Some were on board with what we were doing, but many seemed just as divergent, even more so than I was. This is what they told me. I do not mix the two. That's a fish of a different kettle. In other words, it seemed to me that they were saying, just maximize my returns, thank you. Don't bother me with social or environmental considerations, even if it means investing success. I would soon leave this work. It wasn't for me. But one good thing that came from it. A few years later, I would publish an article about the challenge of bridging faith values and investment practices. And I was stunned to see that it turned into a cover story. So I knew that God was on the move with this, in splicing spirit and money. Third lesson, you're going to find work that will call you to growth, that will humble you, and help you discover your blind spots. This is part of what it means to have livelihoods, to grow. After these 2 jobs, I would serve my longest time at any occupation. 6 years, I would work at St. Peter's College in Jersey City, where I would have the good fortune to accompany young people in their confusion and questions and hopes and dreams, on retreats or service trips and cultural immersion experiences in Honduras or Appalachia. In campus ministry, I found opportunities in which I could share some of the fruits of my journey thus far. After a few years, though, I became overconfident, and I began to stray from the core job responsibilities. I became increasingly interested in other areas of college life, like campus greening. I would lose this job, which was painful to me for quite some time. But I learned that I had a lot of growing to do, especially in working relationships with colleagues. I'm grateful, given my interest in accompanying folks in their spiritual journeys, to have this opportunity now to study at Loyola University in spiritual direction and to administer the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, which I hope I may have the opportunity to share with some of you one day. This is a good segue to the importance of prayer and discernment in growing into our livelihoods. How do we discover our callings in life? Know your story, and let God help you discover your story. Talk to Jesus about everything, especially your memories, experiences, and feelings. And let's not forget to listen and learn from Jesus. Praying on scriptures, using our imagination, letting Jesus love us in our flaws and our strengths. Here's an important point of theology toward understanding our vocations and livelihoods. And it comes from St. Thomas Aquinas, who taught grace builds on nature. Grace builds on our natures, on our strengths and weaknesses. In discerning where God might be calling you, consider the image of a 3-legged stool or chair. There are 3 areas for helping us keep balance, like 3 legs of a stool, in any decision that involves commitment. 1, know your areas of interest, your desires, what you really enjoy. God put those there. 2, also truly understand your gifts and talents and aptitudes. God also put those there. And 3, consider your sensitivity and perception of need locally or globally, and perhaps systemically, how it comes together. Where these 3 legs meet, these 3 areas, skills, interests, and perception of need, may be a very good indication that this might be where God is leading you. Again, take everything to prayer. Listen to God. For as we learn in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, "For I know well the plans that I have for you, says the Lord. Plans for your welfare, not for woe. Plans to give you a future full of hope." Lastly, an image by a great American writer and theologian, Frederick Buechner. Quote, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." To wrap it all up, these 3 weeks, why explore the fabric and foundation of creation, economy, and our livelihoods? Because we do not have the luxury of the 1980s. To my younger brothers and sisters, I'm sorry for my generation's failings. You know better than anyone, greed is not good. We have to learn to discern how God is the source and sustainer of all things, especially the health of our planet, the dignity and justice of our economy, and the meaning and salvation of our livelihoods. It is through all this and much more that we open ourselves when we pray every morning and night. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Have a blessed night and weekend. And please keep tuning in. Father's Name is up next week. Thank you.